All right, welcome to our webinar on ServiceNow. We're going to be talking about how you can climb the maturity curve using ServiceNow as the business system for IT, in the way that IT modernizes itself and engaging the business, and the way that the business engages its customers, and can think about technology as a service across the organization. We're going to talk about where customers start on the maturity curve, where you may have started using tools like ServiceNow, and then maybe where you haven't thought about going, but where you can go as you're advancing in using the cloud, as you're advancing in using common technologies around infrastructure as code and distributed application teams, and where ServiceNow fits into that modernizing picture. And with me today are two awesome guests. The first guest needs no introduction. We have Randy Steinberg. Randy has been around in the industry for a long time. He's an expert at the ITIL maturity curve. He is a frequent speaker at many conferences. Welcome, Randy Steinberg, to the conversation today.
Hi, hello. Happy to join you here.
And then, of course, we have our illustrious Brian Strippy. Brian is a ServiceNow architect. He has been engaged in some of the largest ServiceNow implementations in the world. He is an expert at both some of the legacy usage of ServiceNow as well as its modernization into the way it's used in the business and in the context of it being the business system for IT and technology as a whole. Welcome, Brian.
Hey, how's it going, Nate? Glad to be here.
Awesome. So let's get started. Let's talk about ServiceNow and the overall maturity curve. So today we're going to talk about four big capabilities within the context of ServiceNow and the picture of it within the context of service management. We're going to start by talking through the service management maturity curve, and we're going to ask you to think about where you are on that same curve. We're also going to talk about meeting customers where they are, different capabilities to be able to interact with customers where they need you the most. We'll talk about distributed optimization, capabilities that are tied to enabling the business to use service management even across the business in ways that they hadn't thought about before. And then finally, we're going to talk about how a business starts thinking about IT as a business asset, how they align it to executive intelligence so your C-suite can understand where technology is being invested in and how that technology is benefiting the business from a payoff standpoint, especially as they look at it as a portfolio. So what you see in front of you is a view of a ServiceNow maturity curve. There's a lot here. We're going to start on the lower left-hand corner. So right down here, we're gonna start talking about how this relates to you. So lower left-hand corner, you can see is a company that's very reactive. I often think of these companies as ones that track tickets. They are getting tickets via email. They are doing it via calls. It's break fix. They probably have a rudimentary system they use to track those tickets. Maybe they just hold them in the inbox and they sort of complete them with flags, or they have a very rudimentary ticket tracking system they use to be able to take the incidents and handle them and then complete them. And much like a task list, it gets distributed amongst a group of people, might be small or large. I've seen companies that are very large in terms of numbers, but have very low maturity in terms of how they think about reactive ticket management. They have calls that come in, they handle the ticket, they complete the ticket, they're done. So the way we think about this is understanding that many companies still sit in that sort of break fix zone. You then move into what we would call reactive plus. And reactive plus is where the vast majority of companies are currently sitting, which is they've implemented IT service management, but they've implemented it in the lowest maturity sort of way. They have incident management, they have some service request management, there may be a light portal that people go to, maybe that portal is not the main way tickets come in, and then there's some basic analytics. It's the step above handling tickets, but they still ultimately are a very reactive organization. They think about service management in terms of handling requests from the business, and IT being this kind of service engagement organization that's tied to these things that break, and that they're tying just to like statistics of how quickly they resolve cases. It's a basic understanding of IT. It's better than what you're doing in reactive, but it's still not super advanced. The next step is moving into an organization that has moderate ITSM. This is where self-service is the primary for IT-related needs. Our goal is to avoid them making calls, avoid them interacting with a long call tree interface, and instead using self-service as the main way that they experience the relationship with IT. And they're opening up requests through a portal. They're getting responses through a portal. There's basic operations management happening. There's maybe a basic service catalog that they use for more complicated requests, such as a new user or a new device. And then there's CMDB. You start to see this as like the asset database that companies are using. Maybe not from more of a service management standpoint, but more from thinking about the assets that are distributed across the environment, like the laptops or the printers and things of that nature. It's still a very like IT as a backdoor function that sits and we throw money at and we hope it goes okay kind of thing. The way we've been doing it for the last maybe 20 years. It's not a particularly sophisticated IT department. It's just kind of making that old legacy IT department approach more sophisticated and more efficient as it engages. This is like active engagement in ITSM. Where we start to modernize more above this foundation, which is a very reasonable foundation, is meeting customers where they're at. This is the idea around engaging with Teams chat as a primary vehicle for customers to engage with the service management environment. Instead of even sending them necessarily to a portal, we're actually engaging them in a chat or a bot-driven experience that is very intuitive, it's asynchronous, they can engage in a way that's convenient for them. It's one of the best ways for you to serve a customer. I think of like when I've had things that are broken and you need to cancel a service or engage in a service. I love bot-driven experiences because I can chat, I can deliver it, I can maybe do my operation asynchronously while I'm working on something else. I'm not like waiting in a queue. I get a feeling of doing it immediately. Maybe I actually get connected to an actual human individual when it gets to a certain point in that process. That Teams chat kind of experience is something that's being really interesting and engaging for companies. Also, customer-centric portals that are very aligned to the needs of the functional business area that adds value beyond just like I'm requesting a new PC. Automation of IT functions, the idea that I have things that happen without me even needing to do manual steps. If I'm engaging in Teams chat and I'm saying I would like a new laptop or I'd like this application enabled for me, I can engage in that process without ever needing to engage a service management professional. That can all be something that gets handled via automation. Perhaps also integration with existing support tools, such as like if you have an Azure DevOps or a Jira board where that starts to get fit in. Service management CMDBs that are based around the delivery of a service and how the customer is interacting with that service, maybe even an external customer, and then also the employee experience. There's a lot that can happen in this particular box, that customer experience, customers where they're at sort of zone. We then have above that the idea of distributed optimization, a conversation which is essentially about predicting where failures are occurring before my customer finds out, right? So most of the time IT is operating very reactively. We started to get proactive with the step we were on before. Now we're starting to even predict where the failures are going to occur, reaching out to customers ahead of time, fixing problems before they actually impact a user, functional automation associated with those applications, service-oriented management, very much distributing the optimization across the business. A lot of companies at this stage, they have many business teams that are fully distributed. One company I'm working with, they have 50 separate business teams that are distributed. They do their own service management. They do their own functional engagement. They have their own teams to support the applications. It isn't necessarily even coming to a central help desk, but we're arming them with a set of capabilities that allows the distributed teams to do it in a more governed way, allowing for that optimization to happen that's tied into a DevOps lifecycle that's very dynamic in the way that it's engaged. It's not the old IT model of like everything's delivered by an IT department. This is just ability to distribute that across the whole organization where teams themselves are running the IT function for their applications, and the governance function is what's delivered by IT, not so much the actual tier 1 or tier 2 service management. And then finally, there's this, once you get to that point where you're distributing all these capabilities across the business and you have business teams that are really tech teams, what you need is a better understanding of your scorecards, a better understanding of your portfolio. And that's where executive business-oriented service management is super important. Like, how does my technology investment relate to how the business is using it? How does my executive team look at my technology distributed investment across the business and where that portfolio is paying off or not paying off? One of the things that we're seeing, for example, is that IT spend in technology is pretty stagnant, 3-4% of revenue. But what we're seeing instead is that technology investment in the business is going up dramatically. And we need to be able to govern that over time so we understand where it's paying off and where it's not. This area of service management ends up being a really important part of how we pair the evolution of the business with the evolution of service management. So it's not just about taking tickets and service requests and stuff anymore. That's important, but once you get up to this space, there's no ticket coming to the IT department. This is about the business being able to A, respond from application teams, and B, be in a position where we're giving them governance over the whole technology investment. So we're going to talk about each of these stages, and we're going to go through a lot of these concepts, and Randy and Brian are really going to dig into some of these conversations today. Randy and Brian, any comments on this before we start to dig in to some of the details?
No, just that the business, the very top that you have there does represent a major change in terms of how IT manages itself. You need to build to get up there, so you need to have all the basics in place, as Nate has been going through. But then when you get to that very top, you're starting to actually manage and run your investments by the IT services that you're actually providing. So that's kind of an area a lot of people don't think about, but really is a place where service management reaches up into the executive suite.
Awesome. All right. So let's talk a little bit about, what are some of the blockers that we're finding? Like when companies don't move up different stages of that maturity curve, what are some of the things that keep them from doing it, and how do they get unstuck?
Yeah, so these are some examples that a lot of companies run into in terms of what's kind of holding them back. Some of this you'd expect resistance to change. Maybe the executives aren't on board, and maybe there's not enough of a business case. And certainly there are ways to kind of show that as well. But just in terms of general operations, some of the big ones that stick out are the organization itself may be operating in silos. So the idea of having a service that actually crosses silos, how do you manage to that? Sometimes people are confused about how to move towards that kind of a paradigm. Then some of it is just general basics around services. A lot of companies we run into just don't know what is a service. They'll tend to take a lot of various requests and call those services, for example. Some of them don't have a view of how the assets underpin the services that they do provide. So they don't have a view going to the lowest level. Maybe it's the server, the network, the NIC card, whatever, and then going upstream all the way up to what's the application, the business function that application supports, and then the business capability that's above that. So they don't really have that top to bottom view, and that's something that kind of holds them back as well. So these are very typical, and you may have some of these already in mind that you're seeing within your own organization. But for each one of these, putting together a strategy around, okay, if I know this is a blocker, how are we going to deal with that as we go forward?
All right, let's talk a little bit about ServiceNow capabilities that are related to some of these modern service management paradigms.
So with ServiceNow's San Diego release, they are really positioning themselves to be aligned to that top line business capability to organize and predict and grow your business services organization to a point where your C-suite executives can really find where those investments are paying off in their organizations. So culminating with a bunch of different tools within the context of ServiceNow, things like ITSM Pro, predictive intelligence, ITOM visibility. There are particular areas that really lend itself to this conversation. So let's take automated workflows. Automated workflows in ServiceNow are now being driven from event-based ingestion in your IT suite to dynamically drive automated resolutions within your organization such that if an event comes in, the workflow can trigger and take a remediative action on a server or a stack of development infrastructure or it can even expand your infrastructure if it sees bottlenecks. And it really lends itself to being able to lessen the burden on your interior IT organization to facilitate expedient resolutions of issues. Predictive intelligence is something that has really come to fruition with the San Diego release. Being able to take a look at your entire data set using machine learning developed by ServiceNow for ServiceNow to be able to predict how a ticket has come into the organization, how an incident may have keywords or specific language that might lend itself to being automatically driven to a particular group for resolution. It is really transforming the way that IT help desks manage their incidents and requests and changes, because the machine learning can help facilitate the routing and distribution of those tickets such that your help desk doesn't have to take the time to do that. We're letting our large data sets of information drive that routing of data. So within the context of your CMDB, if you're just getting started in your CMDB journey and you've ingested some assets into your tool, the next level of that is really leveraging service mapping and application design and technical service mapping to align those assets to those services within the context of your organization. So being able to organize your CIs to events, to portfolios will give you insights into seeing how incidents, how changes, how requests are affecting your uptime, are affecting your downtime, which could affect your bottom line as far as that service's financials over the course of a year are concerned. So ServiceNow with ITSM or ITOM visibility and health really is driving that level of detail to organize your services in such a way where you can get that event-based data inside of your portfolio dashboards to really showcase whether or not those strategic investments for that particular service are actually paying off or hurting your internal environment. So as they said before, he loves chatbot-based interactions inside of a CM or inside of a self-service portal. And ServiceNow is really positioning itself to be a leader in that space. With ITSM Pro, having access to out-of-box virtual agents that can assist in the distribution of incidents, it can assist in the requesting of various capabilities within your environment. It can even unlock and reset passwords without even having to go to your help desk. So these are the things that we're trying to leverage inside our internal IT environments to reduce the overhead on your internal agents and allow them to get more investment into the internal projects and things that we're trying to strategize on, such that we're moving our maturity level up that curve. So the DevOps change velocity conversation stems from ServiceNow's deep integration into the DevOps stack. So with integrations into Azure DevOps, integrations into Jira, we can now bring all of our DevOps information into ServiceNow and relate that information to things like change management, problem management, and also bring that information into modules like project management. And all of these interactions all can tie themselves to those business services. So as you go up the C-level understanding of how this is operating, we need to understand all of those different areas. So we need to really understand how DevOps changes, how releases may impact a service. Say something happens in a release and it causes downtime. You can instantly see that that release was tied to this change, which caused downtime, which affected us X amount financially. So being able to integrate into those tools is something that ServiceNow has definitely positioned itself to be a leader in.
Seems like the critical need right now. I mean, if you think about the transition from legacy IT based on virtual machines and on-premise storage and things like that to modern teams that are building their own applications, that have their own DevOps pipelines, that are using infrastructure as code, seems like the evolution of ServiceNow is so tied to how it pairs with the DevOps community, how the service management environment, the CMDB, pairs with what the DevOps community is doing as they build apps. If a company is not changing the way they engage ServiceNow, so they partner with those application teams, they're going to find themselves kind of in a receding environment that isn't going along for the journey with those application teams. This is probably one of the most important aspects of the journey of ServiceNow engagement, is not just like, how do I continue to make this functional for my IT department, but instead, how do I make this functional for the business application teams that are building apps with DevOps work streams and infrastructure as code, so they get what they need from ServiceNow, not just like how I used to do it in the past.
Exactly, and a lot of those application teams are pretty siloed in how they're managing those particular applications. So having the ability to integrate those interactions into one centralized tool that your C-level executive team can look at, overarching, is pretty powerful. And then having the understanding of how those releases and deployments are affecting those services over time is, again, lending itself to that upward trend in maturity.
Totally.
And then the last thing I want to talk about is the business service automation. So being able to take your business services and drive automations that may come out of predictive intelligence. So if predictive intelligence shows that we're seeing this cluster of information inside of your environment that you may want to take action on because it's causing, downtime or it's causing problems, you might be able to develop automations to triage that even before it happens. So if the event-based automations are seeing something happen inside of your environment, you can take that data and then dynamically do something with it. And with Flow Designer and all of its new capabilities in San Diego, they are really driving automation and low-code, no-code workflow design to strategically position themselves to fast track how we can drive resolution, which is awesome.
Awesome. All right, let's talk a little bit about AI ops. Like, what even is this? I've heard of ML ops, I've heard about DevOps, but like, what is AI ops and how does it fit into service management?
So AI ops is the back end of ServiceNow's machine learning powerhouse. So they have built a tool that underpins every module or most modules that are in ServiceNow. So what it can do is it takes a look at all of your data sets, and out of the box, it has existing models that ServiceNow has seen over multiple organizations. I mean, if you think about how many deployments ServiceNow has done, in addition to all of its partners, they have access to a menagerie of data. I mean, it is an extremely large data set, and they've been able to develop models to assist in driving things. We'll just take incident, for example. So being able to drive, clustering, predictive intelligence with, assignment groups or auto categorization or auto routing, even aligning it to a business service just based on text or conversation that's coming inside of that incident. And all of this is out of box. It is inside of ServiceNow, and you get access to it along with all of its default models and all of its default predictive capabilities that comes inside of San Diego and ITSM Pro. So it is a extremely powerful machine learning tool that ServiceNow has developed in-house, and it's called AI Ops because it's not just one module specific. It covers a lot of the different capabilities within the context of ServiceNow.
Love it. All right, let's talk a little bit about what a common service data model is. Is this like CMDBs plural? Is this thinking about like the distributed mesh of what it means to have a data model, that there might be like all these different spots it's coming from, like the Azure Graph, or like what exactly is this?
So this is really a way to, it's a data model that you put on top of your CMDB. And where this came from is ServiceNow recognized that a lot of IT organizations were implementing CMDBs, but they were implementing them like asset databases. So here I have a server, here I have a network line, here I have a router, et cetera, et cetera. And this is the way to make your CMDB more service aware. And what you're doing is you're tying the relationships between those different assets or CIs up into a service model, such that I can look at any particular service. I could look downstream and see all the applications, all the infrastructure items, servers, et cetera, that belong and support to that application. Or I can look upstream and see where this service actually fits into my overall portfolio, what business applications and functions does it support, and then ultimately what capabilities does it provide. So the purpose of this is to basically provide a data model and approach for how you basically link and all those assets together, so that you can kind of see a chain upstream and downstream, to provide some visibility into how that service is actually operating.
All right, this seems like quite the list here, Randy. Let's talk about modern service management, and maybe summarize a couple of these for us and help us understand, like, what does it mean to be modern in the way you think about service management?
Yeah, and ultimately what's happening here is the concept of service management and IT management in general, it's moving up and out of the data center. So this is really some real live examples that other organizations have taken, using a lot of the ServiceNow capabilities to provide things more at the business level than what's there. Some interesting things that are kind of here, just to point out some things that have been done. If you look at the concept of asset management, somebody's used the ServiceNow automated workflows to identify end-to-end lifecycle management for all their assets, all the way from the time they're purchased to the time that they're retired. Another interesting one that one company did is they automated all the management for employee travel. So as an employee, if you're traveling, especially if you're in a consulting firm, you basically check in on your phone as to where you're going, and this application is controlling all the travel arrangements. On the back end, it's handling all the tax and finances. It's also handling travel choice and reservations, and it's all happening from one spot there. So somebody's used ServiceNow basically to implement that there. And then a lot of these are just generally around validating documents. Really what you're doing here is you're looking in your business organization, you're saying, where do I have a lot of redundant, done a million times kinds of tasks that are manually intensive, take a lot of labor to perform, and basically applying the ServiceNow automated workflow and other features to basically automate a lot of that work and make it more of a self-service. So again, these are just some examples of things that have been done out there. And again, the idea here is just expanding out into that business from the data center.
All right, so this is our big topic here, I think, on executive intelligence. Like, top end of that spectrum, we've gotten to fully distributed IT, we've gotten to governance. What does executive intelligence mean? Like, what's the COO wanting to look at? What's the CTO wanting to look at? What's the CEO wanting to look at in terms of how technology is being a benefit to their business and where it's going? And give me a what's up here.
Yeah, so here at this point, you're actually talking to the executives in their terms at their level to assist with a lot of key strategic decision making. I'll give you one example, but the key thing here is there's three pillars to this. There's understanding your services, understanding the demand of who's using those services, and then what the costs are for those services. So I'll give you a live example here where you've got a manufacturing company, they produce widgets, and in the typical IT scenario, the company is acquiring another company that's going to produce more of those widgets. And the IT people are coming to the executive level and they're saying, well, we need $1.5 million for server upgrades. So that's one conversation you can have, which is generally pretty tough. And kind of time consuming to try to come to some decisions on that. The other way this can get presented is we understand our services. So we have a manufacturing support IT service that produces these widgets. We know that from a cost perspective that service costs X dollars. And that from a demand perspective, we know that right now you're producing 1.5 million widgets. So we can now tell you what your IT cost is to produce that widget. Now, when you acquire this company, the number of those widgets is going to go up to maybe it's 2 million or 3 million. So now I can apply the math to what our IT cost is there, and that tells me the investment that's needed to be able to support that acquisition. And so I can start to have the conversation at that level. The executives understand that in a heartbeat, and it helps them make decisions much more easily than trying to understand all the technologies that are kind of going on underneath the covers there.
All right. So how does that mean? What's that relate to services?
Yeah. So again, I need to understand what my services are. And the mistake that a lot of organizations make is they'll pick all the discrete tasks they do and they'll call that services. So if I'm doing password resets or I'm installing a new server, that they say that's my service. And the problem is there could be hundreds or thousands of those in the organization. You can't manage to that. But a service is really just a bundling of features, options, requests, and cost. This is one example of how, we're taking a server hosting and support service, and we're showing how all the different features and things fit into that, what your costs are, what options might be provided with that service. And then all the requests that would be related to installing a server, removing a server, et cetera, those would be bundled into this, but they're part of the service. So understanding what your services really are and then all the requests and options that happen with that is a key point to kind of moving forward with this. And building that and understanding it is really key here. Rule of thumb is that most organizations will have anywhere from 60 to 90 services. If you find that you're getting up into the hundreds or more, then you're probably over-architecting this. But again, understanding what a service is and what you're actually providing is very key to this. Okay, this is an example from a large hotel chain where basically we were building a catalog here of services, and what you're seeing in the boxes are service lines, which then contain a set of services that actually support the hotel business functions that are there. So if somebody went to a portal, they would probably see something like this, and then they could pick out what services or requests from those services they actually want to have happen here. One of the interesting things that's happening now is with the new ServiceNow release is that they're actually helping you get to this much faster by providing this ServiceNow Service Builder capability, which basically allows you to walk and step through step by step how you identify these and how you start building and linking these things together. Brian, I don't know if you want to add anything else to that.
So one thing is that this aligns to the CSDM that Randy was talking about before. So as you're building out these services, it is a wizard-driven guide to how you should set up your business services. So if you're having conversations with the business and trying to align what features and what capabilities are going to be part of those top line services, this would be a great addition to assisting you in that journey.
Okay. All right, let's talk a little bit about understanding costs in the context of services, whether these are ones that IT itself owns or applications that are run entirely by the business, but still have technology invested within them.
Yes, and the goal here is to take a little bit different view of your costs. The typical way that IT looks at costs are by asset. So I'm looking at people salaries and training and network, and I'm providing budgets by that, and I'm rolling those up to a general ledger, and I'm seeing that the costs are there. If I take a service view that says I'm going to combine all those particular kinds of assets into what underpins a service, I can now say, here's what I'm actually spending to produce a service. So an example, just the example we ran through earlier when we talk about, what's my IT cost to produce a widget in manufacturing, I can now get that visibility where I didn't have that before. And what we found from doing this at various companies and companies that have actually gone this route, they immediately find significant cost savings, and that's driven because nobody was looking at things this way. So they find there's a lot of redundancies that are here, or maybe there's expenditures that really aren't in line with the value that the business is seeing for the services there. And it's not atypical to immediately find a lot of potential opportunities where savings can be derived. But so here's, again, they need to understand costs, and the key differentiator here is really understanding those costs by service.
All right.
Want to present one quick example here of how some of this thinking applies and how it's used. So this is a large engineering company, got a brand new CEO. The CEO's main goal is, I'm going to triple the size of this company in the next 3 to 5 years. And he's being presented with the upper left diagram there, where you see where all the costs are going for IT. And he immediately sees, I've got 87% of all my IT budget going to maintenance, just keeping the wheels running. So for a CEO that's trying to grow this company aggressively, that becomes an immediate red flag. We can't grow keep operating this way. So the one on the right-hand side of that shows a target mix of investment that they would like to make towards that to help meet that goal of actually tripling the size of the company. The bottom right-hand side is where they now understood their services. They did some classification to say, is this services that are bringing in revenue or not? What are the plans for these services? We're going to keep them, dump them, improve them, whatever. Maybe we'll outsource them, move them to the cloud. And then the one on the bottom right-hand side is kind of interesting here, where you're taking these services and you're putting them into a quadrant like this, where what is strategic, what is non-strategic. So things that are strategic, high value at the upper right-hand side, those are bringing in revenue, they're helping the company grow. Those are services I want to keep investing in. Those are the ones where I want to get more money to actually keep moving forward with those. I may have ones below that are down the road in the future. So these may be, I defer costs for that, and that's my strategy there. If I get on the left-hand side, at the very top there, those are typical services found in many of your organizations. They're not high value, but they are necessary in order to keep the wheels running. So what do you want to do with those services? The idea here is I want to optimize them. I want to automate things. I want to run them leaner, meaner, cheaper, faster, basically, and basically not overspend in that particular area. And then the bottom one is interesting. Those are basically services that you figured out, they don't provide value and they're not necessary to the operation of the company. So why are we spending money on that? So that becomes a de-investment strategy there. So from an overall strategic level, you're taking all this information, services, cost, and demand, and you're starting to put it into this kind of decision-making in terms of how you're investing, and basically starting to manage the entire portfolio as investments and services. And that's the idea here, is you're providing them information out of your service management system to be able to do things like this.
Awesome. Thank you, Randy.
One of the things I do here from a scorecard perspective is there's this concept of a balanced scorecard by Nolan and Norton. It's been out in the industry for some time now, but basically says you look at your services in 4 different ways. You're looking at it from a customer perspective. Customers see value. Are they buying the service? Do you have a good market share? Things like that. Financial perspective in terms of, are you able to deliver that service at acceptable costs, acceptable charges, and you're not incurring fines and penalties and things like that. There's a learning and growth perspective, which basically says, is that improving the capabilities of the business? Can they support customers better? We've had one large trucking company, and I remember one of the big things that came out on this was the ability to make us easier to work with our customers. So that would be an example of learning and growth. And then internal operations is all the typical things IT is familiar with in terms of just the measuring of operational support services and ability to handle demand and compliance and our projects being done, are they being done on time and within budget and those kinds of things as well. So this is a good example of a way to just kind of balance out the metrics that you have to help get an overall picture of how well your services are really operating. There is an approach to metrics, because I know there's lots of these out there. There are operational metrics, which we're typically familiar with. How many incidents did I get this week? That kind of stuff. KPIs, which are basically performance indicators that tell you how well you're operating, and those are combinations of operational metrics multiplied or divided in order to figure out are you actually meeting a particular critical performance indicator. And then the KPIs kind of feed into critical success factors. So in this example here, I've got incidents and changes and a KPI that says how many changes caused an incident, and then the critical factor is, do I protect services when we make changes? And the thresholds just simply say, what are the benchmarks by which I'm going to decide whether I was good or bad in those particular areas? And all of that feeds into reports here. So this is a way of looking at your metrics basically to drive them up to the top areas for things to look at, those critical success factors, and whether there are actual operating risks and issues that you need to deal with. Then putting all of that together, this is one example here. Some companies did this on spreadsheets, others will use other kinds of tools. We'll talk about ServiceNow in a minute here. But basically just presents an example where you lay out all these metrics, KPIs, and critical success factors. And then what you see at the executive level is a box in the corner at the lower right-hand side here, where I've taken each of those KPIs and translated those to key risk areas. So are we operating with service outage, too many service outages? Do we have legal exposure? Do we have a lot of waste or security breaches, things that are going on, things that at the higher levels of management and at the executive level they might be interested in knowing about. So this is a way that you tie all those bottom level metrics all the way into the upper levels. ServiceNow recently announced this in their new version 2, this portfolio dashboard, which is kind of doing this kind of a capability here. And Brian, let me turn that over to you here if you want to elaborate on that a little bit.
So in San Diego for ServiceNow, they have come out with this portfolio dashboard, which aggregates several modules across the entire ServiceNow stack into one cohesive place that a C-suite executive could come and take a look at their entire portfolio of services. So this integrates availability with event management. It integrates incident management and ITSM with changes. It integrates project management with all of the project and performance-based metrics that they're looking to see regarding specific services in their environment. It aggregates all of the service and CI information, financials, all the way up to the portfolio. So you can dive into those within the context of each portfolio and then all the way down to each service. And this is something that is brand new with San Diego, and they are making a lot of investment here. So it is coming with this next release, and it's going to be pretty exciting for those that are going down the services journey.
Awesome. Thanks, Brian. And this is really a articulation of how services or technology is a verb within the business and can be doing really anything, and that we need to get visibility from a governance standpoint across the entire estate. So even if it's not sort of directly operated by the IT organization and it's operated by a separate application group, having the appropriate governance across the whole estate allows us to be able to consider risk, success, security, controls, and give those teams the independence they need, but also wrap them with the necessary controls to ensure that they're successful. So it allows us to kind of consider the ideas around service management broader than what we may have before, and allows us to be able to think about it with a new set of tools.
Okay, and then lastly, you need to organize as being a service delivery provider. So this is not really a tool piece here, but this is really just operating with key roles here that most service organizations will operate with. So this means I understand my services and I have a service owner role assigned to each one of those services, accountable for the service end to end. that's one of the big challenges in IT is the service owners basically operate across the different silos, if you will, the different technologies that are there that may be supporting that service, and making sure they understand they don't have to be an expert in each one of those technologies, but they're coordinative in terms of working with those different teams, different architects, different people that run each of those technology support areas, and making sure that that's all rolling up into the service that they support. Process owners manage processes that you may be using, and it becomes more acute now, especially if you're automating those processes and workflows. And basically, the process owner would basically kind of manage and be accountable for those pieces. Having business liaisons that reach out into the various business organizations. Are the services we're delivering, are they meeting the needs? Are there services that we're going to need to provide that we don't today? Or do we have problematic services that need to be improved or fixed in some way? The technology owners own technology stacks, so they basically are accountable, as most organizations tend to have today, for various types of technologies that are there, and they provide the expertise that's needed underneath that. And then lastly, a service manager, which is really kind of sitting on top of this overall set of roles to make sure things are functioning and flowing correctly. And they're basically being held accountable from a service manager overall service directive.
Awesome. Thanks, Randy. All right, so we would encourage you to visit our concurrency blog site. There's a lot of assets around this story. So much of this has been written by Randy and Brian to just talk about how service management is relevant for the executive suite, for different types of management of incidents and services, the way you think about your service desk, the way you think about metrics, just so many assets already created for you. Just check that out. Be aware of some of the assets we've already posted on the blog site. And that's all she wrote. So we're really glad that you were able to join us today. Thank you for learning a little bit about how the modernization of service management is relevant to you. Thank you also to Randy and Brian for your excellent engagement in talking about this topic. It's such a relevant thing to almost every business, especially as the modernization of IT into technology is happening in every organization.
Indeed.